These are pictures that were taken in Palembang by one of the company employees and presented to Harry when we left.
And can you point out, Harry?
Looking at them now, I realize what a wonderful job, what a wonderful caring job he did, putting all these pictures in, labeling them, and in addition, giving us the beautiful album, which is leather and has the etched portrait of the Borobudur on its cover. And I hope and pray that Harry was sufficiently appreciative when he received it. But I'll never know. The strange thing was, he never showed me the book after we were reunited. And it sort of came in our possession, of course, for all the years then that we lived in the States after we returned.
Is that a picture of Harry?
Mm-hmm.
But you see a lot of good pictures of either your grandfather or your great-grandfather or your great-great-grandfather as he was as a businessman in those days,
And these are the
talking
locals.
to company people, giving reports,
Mobile
doing
rail.
presentations.
Oh yeah, there he is.
Okay.
And there are some pictures also, some very lovely Palembanese women,
We showed those. Yeah.
which you will see too.
We saw them.
All right. All right, returning for what was our fourth tour or third tour? This is our third tour. The fourth tour was made in, oh God, I'm getting mixed up. Anyway, we returned for our the longest tour that we had there, which was spent mostly in Jakarta, the capital, and we were there 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days, because I counted every one of them toward the end. I was so anxious to leave. And I had 2 children. Don was born in 1994.
1954.
54.
1954, a good, plump, healthy baby. He was born in the Dutch hospital there. And and 2 years later, not quite 2 years later, minus 2 weeks, Kathleen was born in 1956.
And what are we looking at here?
This is Edie and Don.
There are
And then-
wonderful pictures of
And then this one.
the children at those ages. Either your great uncle or your great great uncle
Okay.
or your
No,
uncle.
that's someone else.
Uncle
these
Don,
are other
Aunt
people.
Kathleen. And during that period, Harry had several positions. He was in the marketing department. He was in the personnel department. He was in the sales department. Is sales different from marketing?
Can be.
Well,
Sometimes they're combined.
yeah. Anyway, he had different jobs, so I guess it kept his interest up. And he was a star, an amateur star, in the theater group, the little theater group that was run by the overseas community. And precisely during the birth of Kathleen on the 26th of April, 1956, Harry was the star lead, and you can't take it with you. The ingenue lead.
Perfect. So he wasn't around for Kathleen's birth?
He wasn't around for
He was acting.
And she came without him. So we made friends. We had a lot of social activity in Jakarta, but I do want to point out that there was still, at that time, no theater no movie houses, no good restaurants, no proper hotels, nothing. It was so backwards. It was 50 years behind the United States. But it did have wonderful local fish, absolutely fresh, marvelous rice dishes, and they did have a commissary, which was for the American Embassy personnel. But if you knew somebody in the commissary, you could get some special items that you really needed. And particularly, I needed Klim, which is milk spelled backwards. And I made formula from Klim and fed both my babies with Klim milk. And all my children, for that matter, they all drank Klim. It was good. Made with boiled water, it was perfectly good. So anyway, those years in Jakarta were finally over, and we left for another leave, and we started out the leave in Singapore, and we went to probably the Raffles Hotel for the night, and when he got into the hotel, there was television.
Wow.
And we turned on the television, and Don saw it for the first time, and he let out shrieks of terror and raced across the room and jumped into our arms. Poor little guy.
You know, he's still not that excited about television.
Yeah. So that was home leave. Now the next and last tour we had was we went back to Sumatra, and this time we went to Medan. And Medan was a city very much like all the cities we'd been in so far, except much smaller. Actually, Jakarta had been a big city, and Surabaya had been a big city. Medan was really small. But once again, it was just a native, isolated area in the middle of town, which we never went to. Once again, it was no transportation, no telephones, nothing to see or do. Well, there would have been things to see or do if we'd been a little bit more adventuresome. I'm sure that there are mosques. I'm sure there must have been. But we didn't. We didn't do those sort of things. We stuck pretty much with the international community, which was getting livelier all the time. In Medan, it was an interesting situation because we had an American consul and a great many American members of the consulate staff, whom Harry told me were CIA. And at that time in history, Sukarno, the president of Indonesia, was flirting with the Iron Curtain countries and with Russia. So some of the diplomats who came, and they were also sub-consuls or something of that ilk, also spies. They were from Romania and Bulgaria and Czechoslovakia and Poland and those countries. And we didn't intermingle, except one time, for some reason or another, there was a contest of some sort, a sporting contest. One of the sports was ping pong. And Harry was a very good ping pong player. So he was in this life or death match with a Romanian, let us say, and the score was, 2019 in Harry's favor. One more point. And the Romanian called timeout and wiped his glasses. And when they started up again, he had the momentum and Harry lost.
Oh, too bad.
Sportsmanship, gamesmanship.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the really wonderful highlights of living in Medan was the St. George's party and St. Andrew's party, particularly St. Andrew's, when those Scotsmen get together with their kilts. And we were invited to the dance 2 months ahead of time. And during those 2 months, we had regular dance practices, learning the Scottish reels, so that we could do them, dance them when we got to the party. And so we would get to the party and join our table, and the haggis was piped in. You know what the haggis is? It's that round ball made with all the innards of the animals,
Right.
piped in by the pipers in their kilts, carrying the haggis, and we all were given a piece of it, which if you follow it with a Scotch chaser isn't bad, which we generally did. And then we danced the reels, and we had a simply wonderful time, and the party would be over about 2 a.m. That was a real highlight. St. George's was a good party too, but the British couldn't quite pull it off like the Scotsmen. No.
And Gordon
Anyway.
was born.
Those 2 years in Maydan, and by that time, these tours of duty, which had been 3 years, they had shortened them to 2, and the reasoning was that you had, you flew now, you didn't travel by ship. There were now these flights that went back and forth regularly. So it was 2 years out and a 6-week vacation at home. When we left Maydan,
And Gordon was born.
oh, Gordon was born in Maydan. Don't let me forget that. He was born about 4 months after we got there. And he was a fine, healthy, chubby baby too. I was very lucky with my children. After Gordon was born, very shortly after Gordon was born, he was 6 weeks old. There was another one of these uprisings that the people of Sumatra were having a bout with the troops from Jakarta. So it was deemed unsafe for us to stay there, and one of the reasons why it became so unsafe was in the middle of the night, when we were all sound asleep in our big company house, in those big bedrooms upstairs, Harry and the baby, Gordon, and I in one room, and Don and Edie and Kathleen right next door. 3 soldiers came into the house. 4 of them, actually, 4 soldiers. And they marched upstairs holding their rifles, entered the bedroom, and we jumped out of bed. And so did Don, who was a very light sleeper. He came and looked at them in awe, and they said they wanted to search for guns. And Harry said, "We don't have any guns. We don't carry them. We've never had any." So they searched, and they didn't find anything. And after 10 minutes, they left. But it was disconcerting. And 2 days later, we got up at 5 a.m, were driven to the docks. A great big Dutch liner was waiting outside in the roads, and we were taken by lighter to the ship, but not before we'd waited on the docks for about 5 hours for some reason. All these young children, my newborn baby, I'd sent all the formula and everything ahead. Mon Brouwer had a baby at the same time, and she shared her baby's bottle with me.
Oh, that was nice.
That was nice. So we went to Singapore. We had an absolute ball in Singapore for 6 weeks. Everything was paid for. All our meals, all our entertainment. We went to the beach. We went to the cinema. We went to shopping. We just had a lark for 6 weeks. And of course, I immediately found an ama to look after the baby so I could go out All those things were so easy. And the movie we saw, which I will never forget, was Bridge on the River Kwai.
Oh, how appropriate.
Yes,
To that part
it
of the
was.
world.
So when we left Medan, we were told that we were not returning to Indonesia. And we were absolutely delighted. I thought to myself, well, 13 years in Indonesia, that's enough. And I never wanted to go back, I said to myself, except in later years I would have been glad to go back. Except that Harry died and there was no real point in it. Gordon got back, of course, and did you get back to
Nope.
Indonesia?
Not yet.
Gordon got back, and who else? Don.
Well, Don went to Malaysia. I don't know that
Don
he went
was
to
in
Indonesia.
Malaysia. Yes, okay. So that was the story of Indonesia. And then now we move on to the Philippines. And that's where I have some